welcome Antonio Michael Downing. Antonio Michael Downing is the author of Stars in My Crown.
Hey.
Yes. So welcome, Antonio. Tell us about yourself and what inspired you to write this book.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up on the island of Trinidad, in a very rural area, a one-road village with my grandmother and my brother. And I lived there till I was 11. So if you can picture this place, it's there are unlimited amounts of rainfall, unlimited sunshine. There are crocodiles in the river, snakes in the bush, and parakeets in the sky. And it was a really beautiful place for me to grow up. And when I was 11, my grandmother passed away and I came to Canada. And so my childhood kind of got sealed into this package of memories that was almost like a Garden of Eden for me, because it was literally a garden because it was growing and teeming with life. And so after I published my memoir, Saga Boy, which you know, and I don't have children, but my agent said to me, well, you know, I have a 5-year-old and I think your story would be amazing for them to read. And I started to think about it, and I thought it would be straightforward and easy. It was not. It's just very different. And eventually I wrote Stars in My Crown. And the main inspiration for me was to honor my grandmother who raised me in that time, in that Garden of Eden, that beautiful set of memories from that which spawned me. She is sort of the central character in that time in my life. So I wanted to write something that would honor her, and so that children could celebrate that connection with their grandmother, but also the wisdom that she imparted to me. The big thing was I had very big feelings, and I think what I saw in the children's book market when I was researching is there are a lot of books to get children to express their feelings. Oh, don't be shy, don't hide, come out of your shell. Well, I never had a problem with that as a kid. I was the opposite. So I also wanted to write something that I thought would honor sort of how the wisdom of our grandmothers can teach us how to have big feelings, but also respect everyone and everything around us as well. So yeah, those were my inspirations, and that is the story.
Okay, I think that's beautiful. So how long did this book take you to write?
You know, that's always a tricky question, because I think with children's books especially, there's a lot of times it's not a lot of words. It's about 1,000 words. So, you know, when I wrote my memoir, it was 100,000 words. So it's not a lot of words. But I feel like every word is that much more powerful and impactful. And so what I found was I needed to spend a lot of time thinking before I wrote. So for me, I spent weeks just going for walks and just thinking about the story and the people and what was happening. And then I finally started writing. And I think when I started writing, it probably took about 2 months to get it sort of into the right place. And then, of course, you know, my editor at Tantra and I, you know, did several backs and forths. So over the course of a year, but, you know, it's not like I'm writing all the time. So and also sometimes when you're not writing, you're writing in your head. So it's a hard question to answer, but from start to finish, I would say about a year. But obviously I wasn't doing it all the time every day.
Okay, so as a fellow writer, what I want to ask you is, like for me who is new to writing children's stories, what I struggled with was the word count. Because they will tell you, one thing I learned with children's books is anything that can be reflected in an illustration, you don't need to put it in words.
Yeah.
How were you able to bring it down to, I mean, when you have this, I'm sure when you had this story, if it was, you could have written it in 15,000 words.
Yeah, I mean, but I think all stories are like that, where you can write it in a novel, you can write it in a children's book, you could write it in a poem.
Yeah.
It's still the same story, but I think it takes skill to be able to be brief. In fact, like a lot of times, novelists talk about the opposite problem, right? Where they say, oh my goodness, I coach novelists and creative nonfiction, and they say, I just don't know how to get, my short story of 20 pages into 300 pages. I don't know if I'll have enough to say, and how do I structure it and whatnot. And so typically writers think being long-winded is actually harder, because you need to be able to say things and be interesting over a lot of space. But I find it even more difficult to be brief, to be succinct, to pack layers and layers of meaning into very simple language. And so I would say with a children's book, there's a couple things. Number one is the word count, sure. But I think also the way, being able to use simple language, because you obviously can't use a lot of adjectives and a lot of metaphors and a lot of the tools that are available to you in an adult book. You don't want to do that in a children's book, because it needs to be direct and simple so that kids can understand it. And so some of that is how you conceive of the idea. Some of it is the word count, and some of it is the word flow, and some of it is your diction, your choice of language. And so I had to learn that, look, if you're using a comma, you're probably making a mistake. like if your sentence needs a comma, it's probably not right. If you can't use 3 adjectives, you can only use 1. So because it gets kind of mushy, your meaning gets mushy if you keep piling on adjectives. Now, that's good for adult writing. That's also a good rule of thumb, but you can play with that a bit. You can stack up adjectives that paint a picture. With children's writing, you need to pick one. And so it forced me to kind of go, okay, how do I pick the best word to describe this thing that's happening? And also, how do I stick to material things that are concrete, that are easy to understand, like what it is, and how do I use those as my palette? And that was the biggest challenge, because when I write for adults, I use a lot of metaphor and simile and commas and adjectives, and I felt like though that wasn't going to be the thing in a children's book. I felt like you couldn't really do that and have it be clean and clear and just easy to feel the emotions that were happening. So it's a stripping down, and that's really hard. Being brief is really hard, as you can tell by this answer.
Well, I think for me it's the opposite. When I started writing back then, I started for primary school and all of that. I started with comics. So how a child starts, it always has this moral undertone, the wicked stepmother, the disobedient child. Then I went into teen romance, then before I started writing fiction. Then those days I would write and write and write. But as an adult now, because I know that the world is really, really moving really fast, and people haven't got that patience to sit and read 1,001 pages, unless it's there are writers who still write like that. So these days I tell myself, if anything can be said in a paragraph or 2 lines, I don't see why I should say it in a page. So it's something I've had to master. And then reading by Sidney Sheldon taught me that too. Sidney Sheldon could have a chapter, and that chapter just is he forgot. and that's it. And you know that has a lot to do with the story and all of that. But yeah, but that's
brevity is in, even when you're writing longer books, it's, you know, I think a lot of the craft of being a writer is understanding what level of detail is required in this situation. And with children's book, I think it really has to be a clear image that really rings and sings in the child's mind for them to connect with. And of course, they have less experience, so there's less things you can use to get to that clear image. And so I think clarity, succinctness, brevity is really crucial. And I also think, you know, the biggest thing with children's literature, as you know, the truth is, I'm saying children's literature, but I think these things are the same just in literature in general. I think they're just more intensified in children's literature. It felt closer to a poem to me than to prose. It felt closer because the same level of detail and care into every single word, and you know, rather than how do I say this next great thing, you're really saying, well, here it is. How do I dial in the words and move them around and massage them so that there's a kind of music to it? There's a voice there that a child can connect with. There's a music to the words that flows. And there's also a simplicity in terms of how you evoke the emotion. I think all of those things are crucial. And it was such an interesting challenge. I really loved it. In fact, when I sent it to Tundra and they offered me, they came back and said, hey, would you like to write a series of children's books? So they actually gave me a multi-book deal to do this. And I was so happy because I felt like I'd learned so much in conceiving of the book that I wanted to do more. And mostly I love the characters. I love to me, it's my childhood changed and idealized, but it's my brother and the streets I grew up in, well, mostly the bush I grew up in, and my grandmother and my brother, and the interplay of the characters is really lovely. So I'm happy that I get to go back to that world and evoke it again, because I think it's really fun.
Okay, yeah. So one thing about children's book I notice is the importance of emotions. The child has to be able to connect emotionally with the story. When my nephew visited, I remember reading the story to him, and he goes, Auntie, why is the boy always angry? So I want to go into the story and your temper. Yeah, because at the end of this interview, I'm gonna ask you to read the story to us, because I always feel that when an author reads a story, a children's story, it's priceless because you get to read it in your voice, in your thoughts, and in your experience. So talk to us about your temper, little Tony's temper.
Yeah, I think that, you know, it's a touchy subject for so many people, because when we are children, we are told to behave, you know, especially if you come from sort of British colony. There's a tradition, you know, children are to be seen, not heard. Okay. Yeah. Always behave, always be quiet, always, you know your place, always respect your elders, always. And so there's a point where, and some children are good at it, and some children are not as good at it. You know, as a child, you're just learning how to be, you know, some of us, even as adults, are still figuring out how to be in the world, right? As soon as you think you have it figured out, there's a new challenge. Yeah. And so as a child, I was just very curious, very observative of the world around me. I was very observing of the world around me. And so I think what I saw around me was a lot of people having big feelings. And people arguing, people laughing, people singing. Like Trinidad is a very Trinidadian people are very outgoing in how they emote, right? Not every Trinidadian is an extrovert, but generally I think the character of the island is very extroverted. So I would get into situations where I wouldn't know how to deal with all the feelings I was feeling. And so I would be like, I would just let it out and express it in different ways, some of which I was seeing around me. I would see people be angry. I was like, oh, okay, well, that's an appropriate way to behave. Or I would see a preacher preaching on church on Sunday, and I would start giving speeches and writing speeches and giving my own sermons, not really knowing anything. But I was always doing that. I was always channeling the feelings of the people around me into actions. And I think that there was a point where it wasn't even taking it too far. It was a point where they realized that at some point a child would get tired and they would give up, and they'd find other ways to express themselves. But I was just angry. I would get angry, and that way of getting it out seemed really, it was just a way that I would express these big feelings. And as children, we don't know why we're feeling what we're feeling. We don't understand it. And adults aren't always great at explaining things to us. And, a lot of times they just tell us, well, no, we're not going to explain it. Be quiet. Like this is big people business. You don't need to know that. Right? This is how we interact with children. And what I found was that wasn't, a lot of things about that wasn't fair. And one of the things they say about me when I was a kid was that I would only get mad when someone was being unfair or unjust to someone else. So it wasn't like I was getting mad because I didn't have enough, sugar in my tea or something. It was usually someone was picking on a friend of mine, or someone was being rude or belligerent towards someone else. And I didn't know that. I grew up feeling, I have a temper, I'm a bad person. I need to control that. And then when I was writing my memoir and I asked the people that were there, they said, yeah, you know what? You were like a bomb that could go off at any time. But anytime you did it, it was usually because someone was doing something to you or doing something to someone else that you felt was unjust. And so he kind of reframed it as, it's not misbehavior. You just see something that's wrong and you don't know how to deal with it. So you explode in these big feelings and you yell at them and you charge at them and you swing your little arms and you have a moment and then it goes away. And so I don't know how to characterize. I think many child behavioral psychologists would be better at this question than me. But I think what it is, from my experience, is that it's very often when we're young, we don't understand the feelings that are happening to us. We don't understand many of the things that are happening to us. And often the world and parents and the big people world does not really help us to move through that they don't explain things to us. They don't tell us, hey, here's why this is important. And in the book, in Stars in My Crown, my grandmother sort of does that. She sits me down, she says, she asked the same question your nephew asked. Why are you so angry? And she just said, look, and she sings this song, Stars in My Crown, and it's very soothing. And she connects the song to needing to have patience in life. And she kind of makes it like, look, life will do things and you will have to navigate through life. But if you have stars in your crown, you'll be able to they're kind of things that allow you, qualities that you gain that allow you to navigate life easier. And then you don't have to be big and emotional about everything. You can actually let go of it. And so it's at once a soothing and also an explaining. And that's something we don't really do for children a lot. We don't really explain things to them. Or, we all have that moment where the child who asks why, and they just say why, and why, and why. And at some point it gets annoying and you just say, no, I'm not going to explain that anymore. And so I think it's also a lesson to parents, that we can be, all children really need is a way of understanding what's happening to them. And very often it reframes things like anger, things like big feelings, because really it's okay to have feelings and to express feelings. There's nothing wrong with it, but you need to understand how and when, and you need to be in control of those feelings. And how do you do that? Well, for me anyway, and I think for a lot of children, I just needed to understand why it was important and how and what were the ways that I could learn how to control that. And what happens is, as an adult, what's interesting is I still have big feelings, but I write them into a book or I sing them into a song. Like I'm a performer, I'm a writer, and all of these require big feelings. And so the kid that has big feelings, and we say, stop that, don't do that. Well, if they learn how to control it, it turns into these very powerful talents in their adult life, that whether or not you're a performer or not, being able to speak, being able to hold attention, being able to emote, these are really powerful skills that a lot of adults struggle with. And so I see it as a superpower. Like, when in the comic books, as you referenced comic books earlier, when you're a mutant in the comic books, you have all these powers when you're young and they're all going awry. You might shoot your best friend's foot off or something with your laser eyes because you don't know how to control it.
Yeah.
And so that's how I see my temper as a child is, once you learn how to control it, it actually becomes a superpower. So now, people pay me thousands of dollars to get on stage and speak in emotional and demonstrative ways. And I get on stage tonight, I have a concert and I'm going to sing, and people pay me money to come and emote big emotions. And the bigger the emotions, the better. And so the thing that was a bad thing as a kid becomes a superpower as an adult. And that's a long answer because I think I am figuring it out myself. But that's what I would say is how I look back on my temper as a kid now. I think I always had a gift of being able to feel and be aware of big feelings. I just didn't always know how to channel it. And once I learned how to channel it, it became, well, quite frankly, those are the things that I make a living doing, is emoting big feelings. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, you see, what struck me about your book is how similar we are. Like, growing up as an African, and I believe as a Caribbean child, because we have a lot in common. And for adults is do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah.
Children are better seen and not heard. My nephew was born here and he's growing up here. So most times it's always why. When you ask him to do, he will ask you why.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm wondering, why are you asking? Just do it. Because that was how I grew up. But one question I would like to ask is, because as kids, especially kids with big feelings that were suppressed, do you think that as adults we struggle with being vulnerable?
Yeah, well, that's a big question. Again, I don't want to play amateur psychologist too much, but I think that that's part of it. I think that what you're describing as a child is a feeling an experience that I can relate to, but those are very rare. Those are very rare. There's not a lot of children who are like that, where they're so willful, right? I think that's really what it is. It's a willfulness. And later on, that willfulness, again, that's why we start podcasts and we write books and we because whereas a lot of people would be daunting, we use that willfulness to power through difficult things other people wouldn't be able to do. However, I think that this can be mistaken for a lack of sensitivity, right? Because they say, well, you are very strong, you are very confident because you have this stubbornness. But that's not necessarily true. And so I think what happens is it's hard for people to hold space for us as vulnerable people. And I think that's what I find is that the child who's very willful grows up to be an adult who's very willful. And that makes people think, oh, well, you are strong in all things, so you don't actually need care and softness and support and tenderness and gentleness. And that's not true at all. In fact, I think we need it more because we exist in this sort of very charged emotional space, and we've learned to control it and manage it. But sometimes we just need some care, someone to care for us. But I think children like that are hard to care for sometimes. And they grow up to be adults who are hard to care for. And so that's the vulnerability I would see is that people, because it's rare, people misunderstand it. And they do that to children who have these kind of behaviors. And they also do it to them when they're adults too. People misunderstand them because they think, oh, you are angry, you're confident, you're strong. And they think that's what you are all the time. But really, and it appears to them, as you said, it appears as a kind of a loss of control. But very often it's very, as you say, it's very directed and very thoughtful and rational. There are strong reasons why you might lose your temper in a situation. And so, I think it's incumbent on us to, first of all, and as children too, I think the solutions are the same. First of all, find other ways to channel that energy, but also to tell ourselves positive stories about that way of being. Right? Because, for example, being willful or stubborn, as a child, we're frequently told, oh, that's bad. You're misbehaving. Stop doing that. Except, as you know, Louisa, like writing, for example, requires a great deal of stubbornness. Yeah. Launching a business requires a great deal of willfulness. Doing anything that's outstanding requires a great deal of willfulness because it's probably very hard, which is why not everyone doesn't do it. And so when it gets really hard, that willfulness that they told us not to do when we were kids, that's what allows us to power through and get to the other side. And so it's always interesting, again, the things that they tell us not to do as children become superpowers when we're adults. And I feel like but at the same time, as to your question, we're very vulnerable because of it, because I think others around us, and sometimes even ourselves, we might mistake that strength and that willfulness as, oh, I don't need softness and care. But actually, we really do. In fact, we're often we're so willful, we can go long periods without it. And so we often need it more than others because we starve ourselves of softness and care, because of that stubbornness. But at the end of the day, I don't believe that is a behavior. I think of it as a way of existing. I think of it as a gift that's been given to you.
Yeah.
And our job is to figure out how do we use it positively, because it's so, you know what I mean? As opposed to, oh, you're misbehaving, that's bad, stop doing that. But if that's a part of who you are and that's how you're made,
yeah,
then all you're going to do is feel bad about yourself for the rest of your life. And I don't think that that's a good solution. But I think that's an important thing when we think about children, right? Because we think about children and we tell them always, we have a list of things that if you do them, they're bad, and a list of things that are good. But the truth is that those same things that are bad, quote unquote, can actually be very beneficial and very empowering in your life. So for, people say, well, you're very direct. Okay, well, that's, and that's a negative apparently, except that there are many situations where being very direct in your communications is necessary. And a lot of people struggle with being able to be direct, like there are whole therapist couches are filled with shy people who struggle to just be direct and have self-efficacy, draw boundaries. Like these are all things that directness they're saying is so bad is actually our ability to do that. And so, and the kid that is very, very shy and very demure, that can sometimes mean that there are a lot of things that they're feeling and thinking and want to say and want to express, and they can't get it out, right? And so, there is no good or bad traits. It's just about how do you manifest it? How do you use it? Where do you channel it, right? And how do you navigate the world being the way you are? Yeah, I guess that's the point. Rather than, hey, change who you are, which is impossible anyway. What we should be telling kids is, look, be who you are, but be thoughtful about how you are that person so that you are respectful to others, so that you can be your best self in concert with other people. And I think that's a much better story than, oh, you are this way, that means you're bad. Well, you're not. Clearly you're not. And probably if you go back and you look at the other kids who were very well behaved and very demure, they probably aren't starting podcasts and writing a bunch of children's books, and they probably don't live the kind of life you live, which people praise you for. They go, Louisa, how do you do it? You have the podcast, you're an author, you work with the government. Like, how do you do this? And really, it's all the things they told you not to do. Don't be direct. Don't be forceful. Don't be willful. Don't be stubborn. And that's how you do all the things that you do today. And so I think about that and I think, hey, let's not, and Stars in My Crown is really about that. It's about saying to those kids like us that it's okay to have big feelings. It's totally fine. We don't want you to change. We're going to love you anyway. We're going to give you softness and love and care, regardless of having those big feelings. But we're also going to teach you how to channel it in positive ways so you can actually help people. And I think that that's the real story because, again, as we both know, that's not what normally happens. What normally happens is they're like, you're unmanageable, you're a problem child, you're misbehaving, you're not a good child. And that gives children a complex, right? And they grow up not liking themselves. And I don't want that to happen. I want all these big feeling kids to grow up and start podcasts and write books and go on stage and sing their songs and be happy and make others happy.
Okay, that's nice. So, I'm looking at your relationship with your older brother. All of us have had annoying siblings. So, I want to ask, how do you define home, the feeling of home? I feel food is really, really important when you think of home. Paluri, we love paluri. So paluri is similar to puff puff, what we have in Nigeria called puff puff, or in different parts of West Africa that we call it. Yeah. So how would you define home and the connection food has in regards to making you feel a place?
What a question. I would say that home, it's almost easier to say what it's not than what it is. I think it's not a building for sure. I understand that because many of us have called one building home and then called another home. So it's not the building. I think that it's our hearts. Home exists in our hearts. Our sense of connection to ourselves and to the people around us that we care about. I think that's what home is to me. But there are things that are nostalgic. I think there are different sort of homes. There's home, the place that you first learned to see the world, which for me is the world of Trinidad and Stars in My Crown. That's home. But of course, when you're a child, you see the world a certain way, and really that version of home doesn't really exist. It never existed. It's just sort of how I experienced it. And so it's based on these external things. Like if you give me a mango or some pulori or certain foods really connect us with a time and a place, right? And so but it's the emotions, right? It's the feelings. Like if you give me a mango, what I feel like is the scent of rain in the bush after it's rained and the way it smells.
I was gonna ask you that about the smell of rain.
Yeah, the sound of my grandmother singing a song as I start walking down my street, and I can hear her voice long before I can see her, and it's almost like she's singing me home, right? It's those emotional connections, right? And those sensory connections to time and place. That's what that means to me, that home. But I think really that's a place in our hearts, because when I think of those things, if you go to Trinidad, where I'm from, and you go there today, it's not gonna look like that. It's different. The people are different. The places are different. When I went back, I was like, wow, I thought everything was so big, but it's actually very small.
Yeah.
Right?
The distances are so short.
Yeah.
I noticed that the distances are so short.
Yeah.
You used to walk as a child for 30 minutes. Now you drive in 5 minutes and you go, oh.
Yeah.
As far as I thought.
It was not, yeah. And so the thing that we call home, that we connect to a physical place, it's really a place in our heads and our hearts. It's not really an actual physical place. It's the psychic impression that physical place has left us with. And that's what Stars in My Crown is for me. The world of the book is the psychic impression that my childhood left on me. Okay. Like and Richie Sanchez Ayala, who is also from a Caribbean island. Okay. His art is, the pictures you're seeing there that's his version of that same thing, right? Like, so he grew up on a Caribbean island, and that shaped who he was as a child. And so his pictures and my words kind of form what the book is. But again, it's that psychic impression that it leaves on us.
Okay.
It's not actually a physical place you can go back to. You can, and it's there, but it's different. And it was never what was in your head anyway. That was just your version of it.
Yeah, I think that's hard. I think because I grew up in different places because my dad was in the police, so we had to move around a lot.
Right.
So there are places in my head and my heart I still feel attached to.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one time driving back to my childhood home, and then it was there, but everything had changed. There was now a fence, there was now a road, everything had changed. So like you said, I think it's a place in our heart. And I tell people one thing that is priceless is the smell of rain. Yeah, I said the fragrance of rain. I have. I think the only time I smelled it in Canada was when someone was sweeping a dusty corridor, and they had sprinkled. And I was trying to explain it to someone. She didn't understand what I was talking about. I told her it's a smell that I said I can't describe what the smell is like, but there's just something. Okay.
But it connects you to that time and that place, and it just smelling it just opens a box full of beautiful memories that take you back. And and that's kind of what I was trying to achieve with the book. I wanted to create, I guess, for myself, a box full of my memories. Like really, like a trigger, like the scent of rain is a trigger. I wanted to trigger all these beautiful memories of food and time and place and relationship and care and love, and that's what I was aiming for.
Okay, you mentioned care and love. Talk to us about the importance of showing your relationship with your grandma. One thing, some stories I cherish about some multicultural stories I read is generational relationships, intergenerational relationships. The child or the grandparents, which we don't get today a lot of in today's world. Children with people migrating, starting lives in different countries. Your aged parents and grandparents sometimes are left in the care of strangers or extended family members. So how was it for you? I like that was shown here, Grandma Exley and the memories. So how important do you think that is?
Yeah, I think there was a time where if you were a child, you would be raised by everyone in the family, and everyone in the village would be part of raising you up. And for me, my grandmother was everything, because my mother and father weren't around. And so she was the source of everything, from food to hugs to, motivation to do my homework. Like everything started and ended with her. And so I think that's the real heartbeat of the book is the relationship between little Tony and Miss Exley, his grandmother. I think that's the real heart of the book. It's a kind of it's a connection. It's a connection of care that she gave to me, and in a way I feel like it was special for me. And I think so I want to commemorate it. I want to create a space where I can just go back to it and trigger it. I want to share it with others so that we can appreciate that, because as you say, many of us have deep relationships with people that aren't our mother and father, who helped raise us. And whether that's an auntie or a grandmother or a grandfather or what have you, it's a relationship that's special, that you couldn't have existed without. And there's something magical about someone older in life, near the end of their life, and someone right near the beginning of their life, and the exchange of wisdom and care that can pass between them. I think there's something magical about that, because it's almost like handing down wisdom that can now help that person grow, and they can now hand it back. And that's what I feel this is. I feel like my grandmother gave me a lot of wisdom. Oh, this book represents me passing that on to others in a way where she's not here anymore, but many children in many places can benefit from her lessons now that she gave to me and helped raise me and helped me to be here. And so I want others to have those lessons as well. But it's the beauty of someone older giving the most precious thing they have, which is their wisdom, to someone younger.
Okay, that's nice. And then this page where he said his favorite thing to do was watch the bright stars twinkle in the night sky. Were you a dreamer as a child? Like, did you make up stories? Did you imagine? I did that a lot.
Yeah, well, I think sometimes I go into a room and people say, "Oh, you are amazing. You are an artist. How do you do art? That's so special. Tell us about how it feels to be an artist." And I say, they say things like, I have no artistic bone in my body. And I say, okay, everybody in the room, how many people used to make up a story when you're a kid? Put your hand up. How many people used to make up songs and sing songs? Put your hand up. How many people used to scratch and scribble little pictures and make up their own pictures? Put your hands up. And by the end of those 3 or 4 questions, everyone's hands is up. And I say, see, we're all artists. So I don't think a child and a dreamer is a redundancy, because all children are dreamers. All children make believe and make up and play act and sketch out things and write out things. Their minds are full of dreams and possibilities. And so I guess yes and no is my answer to the question.
Do you believe everybody is born with a gift?
I don't think it's as simple as, sometimes people have one thing that they're so good at and they find a way to connect it to something in the world, and they're so good at it, it becomes their thing. But I think the gift that we are born with is the gift of who we are, right? Not because the only reason a child that is a fast runner,
okay,
running fast isn't who they are. It's just a thing that they can do.
Okay.
And if they happen to meet a trainer and decide to run track and field, they may become a famous runner, and people say, you were born with a gift. But what I think is who we are, like how we feel and how we sense and interact with the world. That's really the gift that we are all born with. And so, yes, it's nice if you're born with some talent that is obvious and very useful, and you could live your life out through it. And that's always beautiful. But I think most people for most people, the gift is being who we are.
Okay.
And simply fully being conscious and aware in that. And we don't need a special talent to make us special. I think all of us are, in our own way, we have things to contribute that no one else can really do.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so what do you think are some of the challenges Black authors encounter when trying to tell authentic stories and find publishers?
Wow, I mean, it's a very big. It's a big question, and yeah, I mean, I'm happy to answer, but yeah, it's a very big question. I think the main problem is that most of the people who run publishers and the publishing industry who are book critics, book journalists are not Black. And I think that's the main problem, or that's the main challenge, is that you have a particular experience, you're trying to express it in your writing, but it's not always understood by the people whose job it is to help you get that to the readers.
Okay.
And in fact, often there are assumptions that are made that misrepresent what we're doing.
Okay.
You know, and I think that's the biggest challenge, because I think at the end of the day, we're all you know, we're all capable, we're all writers, we're all engaged in art, we've read, we've studied our craft, we've worked hard to just complete any book and have it be readable is a mini miracle. It's a minor miracle. It takes immense amounts of skill, vision, and stamina to even get there. But unfortunately, when you're trying to build a career as a writer, you need to connect with readers. And as we said, the market is incredibly saturated. There are many, many, many types of every type of book. And so how you are presented is really crucial in terms of whether you get an audience or not. And that is in the hands of many people who are not Black, and so who might not misunderstand. So I'll give you a concrete example. You know, I wrote my memoir, Saga Boy. When I was writing it, I read over 30 memoirs. I have a whole shelf for memoirs here, to study the craft of writing memoirs, and also to read about the writers of memoirs and why they wrote it, how it happened in their life, how did it affect their life after, you know, what was the progress of the book from idea to publishing to promoting to what have you. When I wrote my memoir, that's what I thought would happen to me. But of course, no, that's not what happened. I was actually pulled aside by another Black author who warned me that, look, they're going to make your story all about resilience and struggle and pain. That's also the only way they know how to talk about books by Black authors. And not everyone, but that's generally what people expect. And so my book was apparently all about misery and difficult things and sadness, but I could see all the times where there was jokes, and my brother and I were imitating preachers, and the love with my grandmother, and you know, creativity and becoming an artist and making up songs. But no one ever talked about those things. And so the dominant narrative in the world around books around Black folks is a narrative of struggle and resilience and poverty, right? But that's not really who we are. And even somebody that does have those things in their life, they have joy and they have love and laughter and creativity. And so it's easy for them to see it when it's an Irish author like Frank McCourt. But when it's a Black author, it's hard for them to see it. And what happens is even the publishers themselves will put it out with that story and that framing around it. And so the publishers, the interviewers, the book journalists, the radio, everyone sort of comes at it from that angle. And so the story gets retold that way. And then the public just gets used to hearing our stories told that way. And so that's a concrete example of how, you know, that just not having enough presence of publishers. And, you know, it is what it is. And it's not that I'm saying it's impossible for a white infrastructure to put out a Black person's book and do it justice. it's just very hard because you need people who are sensitive and who understand what that dynamic is. And my experience is, and it's just my experience, but a lot of folks are very sensitive and they really want to understand your perspective. But however, it's really difficult in an atmosphere where there just aren't Black voices at the table. Right? There's not Black voices in the publishing room, in the editing room, in the what do we publish room, in the which cover do we choose room, in the what book do we write about room, in the how do we write about it room. There's just, so that's the thing.
Don't you think it's because publishing is a business and these publishers need a narrative that will help your book sell?
Yeah, but sure, but publishing is a business. I don't deny that. But it's a business for Frank McCourt's book too. So the question is, why is this the narrative for Black people, and why is it not the narrative for other people, right? So yes, of course, you have to sell the book, you have to have a narrative, you have to frame it in some way. But why can't my book also be framed as, hey, this is a book about a child's connection with their grandmother and the joy and challenge of them growing up, and how creativity becomes a beautiful world that helps guide them through life. Right? That's a narrative. And that sounds nice, and that's probably what you'd have for, let's say, Jeanette Wall's The Glass Castle, which is a book, a very famous memoir where, the father is everyone's poor, there's lots of struggle, the family doesn't get along, the father is always cooking up these beautiful dreams but never following through. All the same things are there. So yes, we need narratives to sell books, absolutely. But why do we keep choosing this one? And partially it's because it's worked before, so let's do it again. But I think that the real revolution is when we start seeing, the problem with racism is not being able to see each other. Like not being in any discrimination, not just racism, is you are tall and therefore you're different than me. And I can either try to understand your experience of being a tall person, or I can make you feel bad for it, right? And I think that that's what's beautiful about books and about art in general. It allows us to see from someone else's perspective. And what we're trying to do is see each other as human beings, not reducing us to our color or our gender or any of that. Just like you're a human being just like me. You have a body, you have a mind, you have feelings just like me. And so I think that when the narratives we use to sell books start being about human beings and empowering those human beings and seeing the beautiful things about it, that's, and that's part of why I wanted to write Stars in My Crown, because I think all the beautiful things are there in Stars in My Crown. And so you can't really frame it as a story of resilience. But I would say the big challenge is most of the publishing industry is white. And that leads to any number of problems in terms of how books by Black authors are characterized. And that's really the big challenge. Like, we really would love to just put the book out. Put the book out and talk about the characters and the people in it, like let it have a life of its own, rather than using these tired old stereotypes around resilience and it's so resilient and it's a struggle and Black identity. And it's like, every book is about identity, but you don't say white identity for a white book at all. And so let's just stop that. Let's just have ways of talking about this that are empowering rather than limiting, you know?
That's why I try not to use the word BIPOC anymore. So how do you think that as Black authors, we can support each other more? Because a lot of people do the self-publishing route because of the whole, challenges with getting published and all of that. People are choosing to go.
I mean, getting published is hard, period. Like it's hard no matter who you are. But in terms of how we can support each other as authors, I think it's about, I try to always, if a Black writer approaches me for, first of all, just connect and know who each other are, know what we're doing, and read each other's work, Like, don't read stuff you don't like, but if someone's doing something and it's good, make a point of taking the time to read it and connect with them and let them know that I appreciate what you're doing. And then also it's just support in terms of the process. Like, first of all, I'm part of circles of Black authors in Canada where we just, some are big, some are small. There's one for children's books. There's one that's just a couple friends talking in a WhatsApp group, but we support each other. Like, someone asked last week, hey, I need an accountant that understands like the arts industry. My current one doesn't. Okay, people chimed in. If there are opportunities, we share it. If someone needs help, like, hey, I just need, I mentor so many Black writers and just minority writers, period, and writers in general, really. If a writer approaches me, I always try to make space for them and say, hey, let's talk about your book. Someone wants you to read something, make the time to read it. If someone wants me to blurb their book, I generally give, depending on the time and if I'll generally make space and make sure I do it. So I think there's lots of ways. I think it's just about, it starts by knowing who we each other are, being aware of it, and just connecting. It's so easy to connect with someone on social media, send them a message saying, hey, great to connect with you. Get their book, read it, support them that way, let them know, hey, I read your book, enjoyed it. Don't read stuff you don't want to read or you're not interested in. But there's enough stuff and there's enough great writers that you can build community, and we're all easy to find. And so that's what I think. I think we really just need to be present in each other's careers and supportive and let each other know that, look, it's because that's the biggest thing, right? Writing is so solitary that we often feel like we're out there on our own. And I think sometimes we need to just reach out and be like, hey, you're not alone. I'm reading your stuff. I love it. I saw you doing that. Let me get out to your launch. Like, we just need to make a special effort for Black writers. Like, we need to make a special effort to do their thing. So I try to do that. It's hard sometimes. It's not always like possible, but I think the point is we need to be trying to support each other, not on some big organizational level, just on a one-on-one personal, like, what do you need? How can I help? Let's get together. When's your book launch? Let me blurb your book. Like, really simple things. But we just need to make the space and make an effort. And if someone comes to me, I'm always like, look, let me help. Like Matthew Morris's book just came out. I remember when it was just a manuscript, they asked me to blurb. I'm like, absolutely, let me get involved. So that's the thing. We obviously need spaces for support because there aren't that many of us. And we're clearly underrepresented in the power structure. So of course we have to create groups to support each other. And that's just how it is. Like, if there's a women's only event because women need to support each other because they have an experience that's shared that no one else feels, no one has a problem with that. They go, okay, go ahead, do that. So why should there be a problem when Black people, an even bigger minority, and historically persecuted say, well, we need a group where it's just us, where we want to support us. I mean, anybody that doesn't understand that is they're either willfully obtuse or they're just obtuse. That's a necessary thing.
I just want to say a very big thank you. We're going to meet again and chat more about this book.
Absolutely.